You're good.
Okay. I have a background in theater. That's where I started doing playwriting and producing and acting and stage direction and all that kind of stuff. And now I also have a YouTube channel that's about film noir. So there's a lot of lighting going on in there. And I produce book trailers.
Cool. Great. Okay, Robert.
Robert Starling. I've been a producer, director. I've been in film and television production for about 50 years. Worked 9 years for the LDS Church as a producer. Worked 9 years with Corporate Video Corporation. Stuff I did was secret. I could tell you, but I'd have to kill you. Currently working on a documentary called Kinship about the Latter-day Saints and the Jewish people and their similarities and parallels. Also developing a channel for children and families in the Farsi language for Iran and Afghanistan. What I'm
Okay, great. You bleeped out there at the end. Okay, the first question they ask us to address is, how can lighting make scenes more dramatic? Which seems very vague and very broad, but go to it. Talk about creating drama with lighting. Anybody has anything to say about that?
I'd love to hear what Laya has to say with the film noir type stuff.
That was my thought also.
Well, in film noir, lighting, it almost becomes like another character on the set. And shadow sometimes even more so than light. So when you have your detective sitting at his desk and you have that classic scene of the Venetian blinds and the light coming through it and the shadow cast across his face and the cigarette smoke rising up through the light and that whole just classic scene, that scene doesn't exist if you just had a floodlight on it, right? So keeping things in shadow helps to build up mystery of a character, and it can help you to focus on what's known, and it can also help you focus on the unknown. And in black and white filming, you can see really stark examples of just the lighting being used to create drama, because they really didn't have a lot of other things to work with. When you're working with black and white film, the lighting is the most important thing, I think, even more so than with later films. So it's a really great place to see the drama that different kinds of lighting can make, and how you can take a scene and do the blocking and the script and everything else exactly the same. But if you change the lighting, you can end up with a completely different feeling for the scene.
Yeah, going along with the idea of changing the lighting, like in terms of how to make something more dramatic, I think that you need to kind of first establish like what the ground floor is, like what the normal is. And so like, because you could do something where you have something hit with just like kind of a flat lighting and it looks nice and everything. But then if you establish that as the norm and then switch over to something where some character walks in and you do have them being hit by the blinds, or there is a lot of shadows and stuff in play, the juxtaposition of those images, the way that you build that, can help build the drama and possibly tension or things like that if you're going for it.
And in that same way, you can have a scene or like a setting that if it's lit in a different way at a different time in the movie, it can make it into a completely different place, even though you're filming in the exact same location. Okay. So for a character or a setting or anything like that, it can completely change what you're looking at.
Did you want to add something, Robert?
Yeah, one of the things that we talk about is the difference between soft lighting and hard lighting. What you're seeing here is basically soft lighting. There's no really deep shadows. And the way you achieve soft lighting is to add diffusion, which can be anything from a frosted plastic to a bed sheet or whatever that you put your light behind, and it diffuses the light. Sometimes you want that, but for dramatic effect, the deep shadows can a whole different feel for things.
Mm-hmm. Well,
That's what we call hard lighting.
What you said, Leah, was very interesting about establishing a scene, or what Brandon said, establishing a scene with one lighting, and then in a different time it's in a different lighting. It's very difficult, I'm afraid, for this panel because we can't see examples, and that would be so visual that.
I wonder if maybe I can try something. I don't know if this will work or not, but with what Robert was talking about, like in terms of like hard lighting or soft lighting, like if you take like a light like this and shine it across here, you can see those hard shadows on my face that's going through there. But then the minute that like a piece of diffusion and send it through there, what it does is
we can't hear you. We can't hear you, Brandon.
you can kind of see how those harsh shadows will come in and out as you diffuse it.
Normally,
that's cool. That's great.
In classic 3-point lighting, you have what you call a key light, which is the main light, and then fill light. Main light would be like on one side of, there's the one that Brandon had on one side of his face. And then normally, unless you're doing a really dramatic thing, you'll have a fill light coming in on the other side of the face. And then you have backlight to separate the individual from the background, and to give a little rim on the hair and on the shoulders and whatever. The normal ratio of key light to fill light is usually 2-to-1, but it's in these very dramatic things where you really create, sometimes it's like 1-to-0 if you have nothing in fill light.
That's great. Does anybody have anything else on this point? I'm interested now into what other things you can evoke besides drama by different lighting. For example, a love scene. And if you could give examples, I'm thinking of the Emmy-winning French police series, what's called in English Spiral or Engrenage, which is terrific about. Especially the love scene at the end of season 5. That is just terrific lighting, and you don't see a whole lot of. And they also do a lot of panning through scenes to different rooms in one apartment, for example. So, does anybody else want to talk about other things and how you evoke them with different lighting besides drama?
Well, I can talk on romance, since I've been studying Hallmark movies and making a bunch of those for the last couple of years. When it comes to the romance type stuff, really it's all about being pretty. And so really a lot of the light that you're going to use is a lot of soft lights and things like that. Generally, you will move to warm tones, like warmer colors. So that idea of the golden hour, like the sunset shots. I don't know if anybody's watched The Fantastic Mr. Fox, but there's a great moment where they talk about in the beginning about how the sunlight makes her glow, and then they cut to that shot and they just really like ramp it up, and it's like golden and she's glowing and she's beautiful. It's all about softness. It's all about warmness. It's all about really just making the main characters that you're focusing on look as smooth as possible.
Some of that has to do not only with lighting, but also filtration. One of the most famous things in motion picture history was the first cinematographer who decided to make the star look more beautiful by putting a piece of pantyhose in filter ring front of the lens and therefore softening the image. And like Brandon says, that's part of the prettiness thing.
Yeah, a lot of those that you'll use nowadays they're called Pro Mist filters that'll screw on the front of your lenses. We also shoot a lot on Nikors, which are vintage lenses that kind of have the characteristics that does that in the lens itself rather than having to do some tricks and stuff with it. But yeah, you can do a lot of different things for that.
Laya, do you want to add something here?
I think a lot of what you convey with lighting, it does still end up being drama at the end of the day. But I was thinking you could also you can convey irony with lighting if you light a scene in a way that it isn't. Oh, like if you had a romance scene and you decided to light it with really hard light, you would end up with a really disconcerting sort of feeling to it. So you could put it in like almost like a horror movie sort of vibe into it if you just light it completely the wrong way. So you could turn a scene without having to change anything else about it and make it an ironic scene or a disturbing scene. Or if you have a very disturbing scene happening in a movie and you decided to light it with that incredibly soft light. I can't think. There's a movie in my mind, but I can't think where they do that. And it's like there's a murder going on, but it has this incredibly soft light, so everybody looks really beautiful, and the characters are speaking to each other in these really soft voices. So you end up with this really disturbing, ironic feel to the scene.
Interesting. That's great.
Yeah, to add on to that, I actually think The Others is really brilliant in the fact that they established the children as having a health problem that comes from being exposed to direct sunlight. And so as that film builds up, a lot of the big kind of horror moments has to do with when the mom comes in and she sees all the doors are open and all the curtains are gone and there's sunlight spilling in everywhere. And so they actually reverse it so that the sunlight is the horror element of that movie.
Mm-hmm. And all the comfortable scenes are in like darkness, little bits of firelight. And then when you get that bright sunshine, it's so stark that it just shocks you. That's a good one.
Well done. Well done. Anything else on this topic before we... I
can just think of one more example that I love is, I don't know if anybody's seen, what's it called? Insomnia? The remake that I think David Fincher does. He has a scene where the guy can't sleep and he's in this bedroom and this light's coming out through the window and he's trying to box it up and tape it up and it's just this bright light that's constantly pelting him. And you hit this moment in the movie where someone walks in and asks him if he's okay, and he says that he can't cut the light out, and they say something like, it's completely black in here, and he's confused, and you're confused as the audience, and then they turn on the light, and everything just blasts out and kind of like overwhelms you, and you realize that he's been kind of going crazy in this darkened room this whole time.
Great examples. The next question they want us to address is why was lighting for old black and white movies so important? I just attended Sundance and I noticed, I think maybe 3 of the movies I watched, modern, very recent movies, were in black and white for very interesting effects. So let's address this. Go ahead.
All right, well, go for it, Robert.
Well, the biggest thing was you didn't have color, so you couldn't have differences in color and what to paint the palette. So all you had was light to paint with. And so much more critical for the black and white movies. See, it's interesting when you watch an old black and white movie or TV show, and if they go from interior scenes where they had modeled light and used light very creatively. And then they go to an outdoor scene where it's basically flat daylight and can be a very jolting experience because there's a lot of difference. They have very little contrast in the outdoor scenes, but they have really nice contrast and modeled light in the interior.
Great. Did Leah or Brandon want to add something?
I think you couldn't use the different colored lights like you're able to now. So you couldn't, use a blue light or a red light. So everything is just about the amount of light and where it's coming from. So you end up focusing so much on that, so you can see all of those little differences, because they didn't have. It's kind of like when you don't have a large budget and you don't have as many tools as you might want. You have to be more creative with what you have. So in those old movies, sometimes you'll see more subtle uses of the amount of light and the source of light, or sometimes more stark uses of it also.
You need to also remember that back in those days, the film that they were using was very slow film, so they had to pump in a lot of light. Nowadays, the cameras are so sensitive that as hot as it was in the old days.
Mm-hmm. Brandon?
I'll just kind of fill in a little bit of what that dropped out is, the film stocks and stuff are very different. So you had to blast tons of light in there, and it definitely created different shapes and looks to that kind of stuff. And then to go along with the comment about like the colored lights and stuff, once you go to black and white, there's a lot of all the colors and the colored lights and all those things are kind of removed. So there's like a simplicity that you have to work with. And so they actually got really good, like in those films, in terms of using contrasts of lightness and darkness in order to convey the images and the messages that they want through that itself. Especially if you go into like the Germans were actually really good with it, with the German expressionism, and they'll even go through, if you watch the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, like they would even paint light and shadows like on their backdrops and things like that, and be extremely specific with how those play out to kind of create different like tones or moods that they're trying to express within their scenes.
I was thinking of the 1920 Golem in the same German expressionist thing. That one is. I wish I could show stills from that. It's amazing in the use of for eeriness, and that's a great one. And I also like the more recent A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night. It's in Farsi, and it's I think it was filmed in Southern California, but she's a vampire. And, oh, did I spoil that? Anyway. It's just the black and white contrast is just amazing and really helps with the eeriness. In fact, I think sometimes it's much more effective than color. In my opinion, sometimes it's the use of black and white.
Yeah, if the audience that's tuning in on this is kind of interested in seeing like the comparisons between those. A really modern example is Parasite, that just won the Best Pictures last year. That one actually got a theatrical release both in color and in black and white. And you can try to get a hold of and watch both and see how they handled the process different for their images. I know there's a really good interview with the director of photography on that one that actually talks about the post-process that he had to do and the differences between what they embraced while they were working with color and what they had to change and embrace when they're working with black and white.
Oh, that's really interesting. Thanks, Brandon.
One thing that most people won't realize unless they were on the set and see them shooting in the older films is because the film stocks, in addition to being slow, they were more they weren't panchromatic. In other words, they didn't react the same way to all colors. I remember the first time I ever visited a movie set, I was about 5 or 6 years old down in Georgia. They were filming the Phoenix City story. They were doing an exterior night shot. And I saw that they had painted one of the buildings purple. I thought, well, why in the world did they paint that purple? Because the way it showed up, black and white. So if on the scene and saw things in color, you would see some really weird stuff, but it came out right on the black and white films that they had at that time.
Great. Anybody else want to say something? We can go to questions from the audience now, if you would like to field them for us, or we can continue with other questions I had. Do we have anything from the audience?
Sure. Let's see. Nick asks if where'd it go? You caught me a little off guard. Here we go.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. That's awesome.
By the way, I'm just kind of curious. How many people do we have attending?
Oh, we should go ahead. Okay. How does location, height, and angle of the lighting affect what the audience sees? We've sort of addressed that, but you want to? Well, just talking about the purple building, I wanted to mention a friend of mine worked for the Coen brothers, and his job was, one of the brothers would say, match that chain to the wall it's against, and it would be very precise coloring that would have to happen, and my friend was in charge of matching it exactly. But so we're talking about location, height, angle of the lighting, and affecting what the audience sees. Anybody going to take that on?
Want to go with that, Braden?
Yeah. I mean, if you generally, like, if we talk about the romance and stuff like that, you want something to kind of come in at the 2 o'clock angle. That usually gives you pretty good shadows and everything like that. The more extreme you go on the different angles, the kind of more extreme of a statement that you're making. So, for example, you have the classic like horror movie where if you do the light like from below, it distorts kind of the facial features and things like that and makes it more, uneasy, like what Robert's doing right there. Honestly, the way that those things can affect it can be so vast and far and to different extremes. I think that the best way to go about it is to play around with the lights, see what works, what doesn't work, and then to and then to just find your own images, like look at other movies, like pull screen grabs and stills and study them and see what emotions it's evoking for you and how you can recreate that.
That's good.
To make your light soft is to bounce it off of a white card or something. That's very typical. You can either diffuse it through a filter or you can use bounce light, which makes it.
Great. And Laya, did you want to add something? No. I have a friend who did follow spot for Ballet West for years in the Nutcracker, and she can't listen to Tchaikovsky because it always says in her mind, and follow spot on 3 is what this music tells her. So because that's a very blatant way to focus the audience's attention, is a follow spot or the film equivalent of a follow spot on stage. But these great panelists have pointed out different ways that can be more subtle than a follow spot in pointing out to your audience what they should feel and what they should see.
One of the since you do a lot of work with stage plays, when I was in LA, they did a play called The Trial of the Stick of Joseph, and it was a courtroom drama about putting the Book of Mormon on trial. And at the very end, the scene that stays with me all these years, I don't remember much of the rest of it, but I know at the very end, all the rest of the lights went out. The defense attorney was standing there with the Book of Mormon in his hand, and the light just slowly went down until that was all that it was illuminated. So the stage was dark, and it was very dramatic.
And we've got a question from the audience.
Hooray! Yes.
Redwall fan would like to hear more about blocking.
Okay. Anybody want to talk about that?
I was kind of confused at why that was in the description, because blocking normally refers to actors. When a director tells the actor, start here, move here, sit here, whatever, that's blocking. Now, camera movement may be what they're trying to talk about. And when I was directing TV, you had to know the terms and the cameraman had to know the terms. If you tell the cameraman, and it has to do with how the camera is moved. If you say pan, then you're turning the camera either to follow a character or to reveal more of the background or something like that. You can zoom in, zoom out, pan left, pan right. You can dolly in, which means moving the camera itself rather than zooming with the lens. And then there's also tilting up or down. There's trucking left or right. These are all ways that you describe the camera movement that you use.
But I think we can talk about blocking as being the actors moving through the light or into light. One actor I worked with once, he always said, I always turn my eyes to the light because then it looks like they're glittering, and that's a very sexy thing. So he had that little trick of his to heighten his attraction on stage. So as directors or as even as lighting directors, we can understand the blocking too. Did Brandon or Laya, do you want to say something about blocking just because we had that question?
Do you want to go first, Laya, or do you want me to tackle it?
She's non-committal. Okay. Go ahead, Brandon.
I mean, come over here. Sorry, I've got a push to talk type thing so that I don't jump in unexpectedly. But yeah, blocking is kind of a hard one just in terms of how general it is. A lot of times when I'm looking at blocking, I'm looking at the scene and actually seeing what the actions are for the characters, because the proximity that they are to the camera, the way that the lighting is set up for them is going to draw the audiences to their attention. And so it's about how you stage them within the frame to draw attention to them or have them fade away depending on what you want the audience to be caring for within the moment. I was just thinking recently I rewatched Rambo, the original Rambo, and they did very specific things where they would block the characters so that they would be in the screen, but you wouldn't pay attention to them until like a character walks past him for him to jump out and attack the person. There's so many different ways that you can tackle that. It's hard to really cover all of it until we get into more specifics. Is Light having issues with hearing anything or talking?
I think
I'm having with Robert. I'm having some kind of issues.
I think Leah's indicating she can't hear you, but I hear you fine.
I can hear you. One of the scenes from Golem that I thought I might like to share, and you'll have to go online and find it, is the Golem is at the top of these old stairs, and all the people are blocked so that they lead the eye, plus the lighting is incredible. They lead the eye up to focus on him. And that's one thing you can do with, I mean, that's very basic blocking. And of course, there's the notion of upstaging, that movement, or when people turn their backs on the camera and their eyes go in one direction, then you look in that direction.
We have another question from the audience.
Yay. Great.
Merlepep asks, how constrained to realism should we be, i.e. making light come from realistic sources, and how much artistic license can we take with the lighting?
As much as you want. Go ahead.
I was going to say you can be as restrained or as crazy out there as what works for the story. And
particularly,
go for it.
Go ahead.
I think it is important that the audience understand where the light is coming from, or else they can be confused. I know I've watched shows sometimes where, you know, they have a light which seems to be coming from nowhere, and it's not really believable in that context. So principle of lighting is that it does need to be motivated, unless you're in some kind of a crazy dream sequence or something. You're not hearing me.
You're fine. I'm just feeling bad for Leah over there. But I mean, I would say that it's good practice to try to find practical lights and then light things so that it feels realistic within the shot that you're doing. One thing to know is that what feels real is often not. We just finished filming a horror movie that took place almost entirely at night in the woods, like out in the mountains. And we were blasting all kinds of lights out into the trees and on the people and stuff like that. And, if you're standing out there, you're like, yeah, this is totally not normal, not natural. But you look in the frame of the camera and it looks just fine. If you ever pause any nighttime shots or scenes, you see all of the trees and everything like that. And normally you wouldn't any other way. And so I would say try to tackle realism first, because once you kind of get the basis to how that works, it then makes it easier to understand how to break it.
That's very good.
One of the most interesting lighting situations in recent history was a film called Barry Lyndon that was done by Stanley Kubrick back in the late 60s, early 70s. And he had these scenes that were like a big dining hall or where they were having a big party and stuff. And he lit the entire thing with candlelight. And that was kind of a gimmick in a way, but it was interesting to see what he could do with nothing but candlelight. He had a lot of candles.
That's historical lighting as opposed to modern lighting. That's a good point. He used no artificial light in that? Is that the story?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but you have to be careful with that. I was talking to someone who did visual effects for Revenant, the one with Leonardo DiCaprio, and they wanted to do like really low light candlelight type style of when they go into this kind of cabin, and they ended up spending a whole lot of time repainting light and details and texture back in there because they lost it all on the shot on production.
That's a good point too. Laya, how are you doing? Anything to say? Oh, yes.
Yeah, I'm messaging her on the Discord thing. I'm trying to see if we can get it. She says that she's not really hearing anything, so it might be a problem on her end. We'll see if we can get her back in.
Okay, thanks for taking care of that. Brandon, you just touched on something that's our next question, unless we have more from the audience. Nothing. Okay, about coloring. And how, can you speak a little about how it's done on editing programs? I've been looking at a couple of film editing jobs, and they say that they're really interested in someone who has good coloration skills. Like that is one of the hardest things to do and to do well in post-production. So you want to address that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a science, it's a craft, it's a skill. Was the question exactly?
How important? Well, this is a bit not just how it's done on editing programs, and if you have any suggestions for how to do it. How important is it to get the coloring right when you're filming, as opposed to doing it during the editing process, or what?
Well, I'll say this: it's extremely important. I remember when I was a teenager growing up, making like home movies and playing around with things and trying to recreate shots of other films and stuff, that I would shoot things and I would light things and I would try to do all this stuff, and I just found that nothing I could do could hit anywhere near close to the level that they were doing. And back at that time, behind the scenes and deleted scenes on DVDs were pretty big, but they didn't process everything yet. And so I found some DVDs that showed deleted scenes, but they were all raw. Like before they processed color and everything, they just tossed the raw deleted scenes on the videos. And I remember watching them and being like, that looks like what I shoot. Like that looks bad and grainy and flat and like all of these different kinds of things. And it kind of shined the light on me, at least, to see how important the post process is for pulling those images out that you want. And so my first recommendation for something like that would be to learn what it means to shoot flat and then shoot it flat, and then take it into like a post color program like DaVinci Resolve, and jump on YouTube, look at some different tutorials and things that people do, and just fiddle with the image and mess around with it and see how you can get like the looks or the styles that you want from there.
Yeah, one of the first things that a cinematographer is going to need to do as he starts a project is confer with the director, determine what the color scheme. It's a gritty sort of detective story thing. You're going to have a lot of blues and green stuff, and if it's a rom-com or something, you'll have a lot of yellows and pink, warmer colors and things like that. And then once you determine the scene, the matching of colors from one camera to another, from one shot to another, is very important. That's why you have people, and I've got a couple of friends who are colorists. That's all they do, is they take a film after it's been edited and then match it up scene to scene.
Okay, great. But I would like, I guess, Brandon and Robert, if you could, in that order, just give closing comments, and then we're done.
Sounds good. Yeah, to wrap up, I would say, thinking especially on that last question, something to keep in mind is production for a Hollywood film is usually like 2 to 3 months, and it's about 2 years before something gets released after production. So there's a lot of time that takes going into post and crafting and coloring and making all that stuff work. And so treat it with that same level of respect. If you really want to jump in and learn cinematography and lighting, get those skills down, I highly recommend just taking screen grabs of movies that you like and study them and set up, your iPhone camera or whatever you have and whatever lights you have, and just sit there and tinker with it to try to recreate what it is that you're seeing. And as you dedicate yourself to that craft, you will learn, you will grow, and who knows, maybe I'll be talking with you next time on one of these panels.
Great, thank you. And Robert?
Well, I just, in trying to sum things up, I go back to kind of the 4 words that started it all for all of us, and that kind of make meaning of everything. And that was spoken by someone very important who said, "Let there be light."
Okay, great. On that, thank you both, and Leah too. It was nice to have your input, and we'll see you at the movies, I guess.
Just real quick, all of her stuff crashed, but she does say that it was nice to meet everybody. Thanks for having her. Hopefully she can get this fixed on her next session, but she was grateful for being here.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, Brandon, for conveying that. And thank you, Leah. And thanks to our audience. And we didn't see, but posed us some good questions. Okay, thanks.